Okay, today I want to do a lecture on learning. I actually broke it into two halves because it's so big, but learning is pretty straightforward. Now, a lot of times people don't see psychology as a science, and I understand that, but if nothing else, we contributed learning theory, which is very objective, very observable, and you can use these principles to change people or animals' behavior. Oh, here we go. I got a definition right here. It's a stable change. It didn't just last for 2 seconds. And this change is because something happened to you. So something happens to you and you have this lasting change that lingers with you. Okay, so when I talk about learning, hopefully this definition right here makes sense. Those two different components. I have Tiny Dog on here. Because the first area I'm going to get into is all about making associations or connections. And this is a real thing. Every day when I leave the house, it's like he hears my keys jingle. Well, he's made a connection between that and knowing that I'm fixing to go. Well, he also knows that when I go, that he's going to have to kennel up, but when I kennel him up, I'm going to give him a cookie. So now when the keys jingle, he just goes and runs in and sits in the kennel. I don't have to tell him to kennel up. He already knows I'm going just from hearing the keys jingle. He's made this connection that I'm fixing to go, which means if he kennels up, he gets a cookie. I hope y'all are with me so far. So anyway, a stimulus, I'm going to talk about this stimulus response theory because this is where learning started. I think I mentioned this on the last lecture, but a stimulus is a thing, a light, a sound, anything that we can react to. And so I have an example here. Hopefully it's not too loud. Like the big air horn. Now your response might be cover your ears, okay? So stimulus response theory is where learning theory starts. And the reason I'm making a big deal on this is because on the test, you're going to see a lot of things end in S or R. If it's an R, don't go putting a thing. You know what I mean? If it's an S, don't go putting a behavior. And so we'll get into this a little bit later, and I'll make this clearer. So here's the three types of learning that we're going to go through for this lecture. Only this one. The second learning lecture has to do with these two, which I think are a little bit easier. The first area of learning, which this lecture is about, I spend the most time on it because I think it's the most confusing, is classical conditioning. So I want to focus on this word condition. This weird word means learn or train. So anytime you see condition, just replace it with learn. So classical learning. Now, why does it mean learn or train? Well, if you were in class, I would start picking on the athletes, especially my ball players. Because it's like, if I go to Dick's Sporting Goods and buy a baseball glove and go to the field today and try to use it, that shit ain't going to work. You might as well just put a piece of wood on your hand. You haven't trained that glove. You need to take that shit home, put some saddle soap on it, neat's foot oil, whatever you do, and put a ball in it and wrap that around just like I train the brim of my cap. I don't just leave it, well, some people leave it straight, but you train it. And so that training or conditioning is like molding. Now, when I talk about classical conditioning, I have this little box. I just told you a stimulus is a thing and a response is a behavior. So on the test, I have this shorthand. Because see, this means untrained and this means trained. Okay? So UCS means untrained thing. UCR means untrained response. What's an untrained response? An instinct, like a reflex, right? A trained thing is something you have to learn about, a thing you have to learn about, and a trained behavior. Well, that's what we're really talking about. How can we train behaviors? I'm going to come back, but I guarantee you on the test there's going to be a lot of, is it A, UCS, B, UCR, C, CS, or D, CR? Okay, so coming back to that. I usually talk about is Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov, I don't know why he was studying this, but he wanted to see how dogs salivated, in response to meat. And so he would set this plate of meat right here, and he has this little thing hooked in their mouth. I don't know if you can see where I'm drawing now with that color pen. And it goes down here, and then he measures over here how much dog spit comes out of there. It's just so weird. The only reason we remember Ivan Pavlov is this. he kept thinking he was making a mistake in his experiment because he couldn't get this meat right here. Let me get the pen better onto the the shelf fast enough because the dog would already start salivating before he can get the meat on there. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to start, the thing over again? And what was happening is the dog was anticipating the meat coming based on clues. Maybe they could hear the footsteps. If it's like my dog, if I crinkled the dog food package, he knows. He's made that association. So all these different clues the dog had made his mouth start watering before the food actually got to the shelf. I hope I just made sense. Now, he anticipates what's coming based on these clues. This becomes important. I don't want to go off on evolution right now, but I could. From an evolutionary perspective, you better be anticipating what's coming. Now, if we were in biology, if you're going to get a smack versus food, this approach avoidance behavior is a huge thing. Predator-prey interactions. I don't want to get into this area, but I love it. You know what I mean? And so the better I can detect clues, probably the better I survive. Vice versa, if I'm just a stupid animal that doesn't pay attention to any clues, I might be dead. Okay, so one of the types of animals I'm always like tripping out on, I see them a lot in the desert too, is deer. You gotta be real careful, but because you make any sound around a deer, I think I have this on here. I don't know if you can hear that, but can you hear this? Maybe you could hear those two little clicks I just made, but as soon as you make a click around a deer, it's like, oh, what was that? And so deer have to be real sensitive to different kinds of twig breaks in the wood, but they can't just jump around to every twig break. If you just freak out on every time a twig breaks, then you're going to be a neurotic deer and never eat anything, you know what I mean? Because you can't leave your whatever shelter. But if you never pay attention to any twig breaks, you see what I mean? You're clueless, then you're going to be dead because a hunter can walk right up to you. Now, let's come back to my box. Hopefully I haven't confused the whole issue. The first thing that I'm going to talk about on the next slide is this. How do UCS's unlearned things cause UCRs, which are basically instincts, unlearned behavior? So I'm going to talk about basically this little piece right up here. Okay, here's my example. I have a piece of meat. A meat is a thing. It's not a behavior, so it has to be an S, and I argue it's an untrained thing. Because if I have a dog, I don't have to take him up to PetSmart and say, my dog doesn't like meat. Do y'all have meat training class, right? You don't need that. So this untrained thing right here will cause an untrained response. He automatically salivates, right? So that's what I call an instinct. Those are how the first two relate. Now I have it right here. See, untrained thing, I forgot I had it on here, causes an untrained response, which I call an instinct. That piece should be easy. Just a reflex. You always have a UC in front of it. Just keep that in mind, unlearned. Now what Pavlov, his experiment is more about is making these connections. And so early learning theorists, would add a clue in, just like with Pavlov. Well, what's the clue? Here's the meat, and now I'm going to ring a bell each time I bring the meat out. The first 2 or 3 times the dog doesn't make the connection, but pretty soon, if it's like my dog, he's gonna be food motivated, and anything that predicts that food is coming, he pays attention to. So here it is. I ring the bell, bring the meat, and here comes the dog. Like I said at first, he doesn't really get it in his head. He just hears a bell ringing, but he sees the meat with his face. So at first, it's still an instinct. Okay, so I keep pairing these two things over and over. This is where learning is going to happen because I'm pairing the things, S's, and then he connects it in his head. Not at first. At first, he's just still reacting to the meat. I hope you're with me. But there's that day, or probably 2 or 3 dinners in, where he goes, wait a minute, that bell is always around right before the meat comes. Aha, I'm going to start salivating as soon as I hear that bell ringing. So this has to be learned. Okay, so the next slide. Now, if I ring the bell, he salivates to a bell. Dogs don't come out of their mama's womb salivating to bells. They have to learn to salivate to bells. They do come out of their mama's womb pre-wired to salivate to meat. They don't have to learn that piece. So now back to my little thing. I call CS's clues based on Pavlov stuff. It's not always that, but this is the way Tim teaches it. And the clue is predicting either a good or a bad thing, but in this case, a good thing. And so his salivating had to be learned because he had to learn to salivate to a bell, whereas up here, you don't have to learn to salivate to me. So sometimes I show it this way. Right here, no learning. Why? You see, unlearned. Right here, I'm going to teach. This is where teaching occurs. So teach. And then, oops, I didn't know I had that already circled. Right here is where learning has occurred because now he's salivating to a vowel, and this is what I wanted all along. I hope that made sense. My first example is totally inappropriate, but it's awesome. Now, vodka, is it a thing or a behavior? You better say thing. Now, I'm going to argue it's a UCS. Why? Because if I make you drink this whole bottle tonight, you're probably going to throw up. UCR, automatic. Right? That's your body's way of protecting itself. Now, let's say that instead I drink screwdrivers all night long. And then I get sick and barf my guts out. The next morning I wake up and I go to the refrigerator and it's like, oh my God, I got bad cotton mouth and a raging headache. I've got to have something to drink, and I open the refrigerator and it's like, oh no, I'm not having any of that. Oh, I just start gagging, almost barfing right then. But see, this thing didn't make me sick. This is why I love this example. It's a thing, but it's become guilty by association. Are you with me? And so it's a learned thing. But see, this learned thing could have been anything right here. It could have been cranberry juice. It could have been Red Bull. I could have made any kind of mixer. And the mixer itself is what I would gag to, not the thing that got me sick, the vodka. I might gag to. Okay, so next example. I'm going to come back to that example again and again. Is money. Is money a thing or a behavior? You better say thing. Now look in your box. Do you have to learn about it or not learn about it? It can only be a CS or UCS. Once you break it down to thing or behavior, you got a 50-50 shot. Well, it's a learned thing, right? Little babies don't know what money is. They tear it up. So you learn that money is special because it can get you the things UCS you like a steak dinner or a car or whatever else it is. Okay, the next part of the lecture is called acquisition and extinction. And so acquisition, when I acquire something, to me that's a fancy way of I got it. Extinction, it went away. Okay, so when I talk about this to learning, this is the learning curve. It kind of looks like this, like an asymptote. Okay, so I love math. Now, on the y-axis is drops of saliva elicited by CS. CS, oh, that's like when I ring the bell, how much does a dog salivate? Well, see, this is how many times I pair on the x-axis the bell and the meat. 2, 4, 6, how many dinners do I feed him? Well, see, now if I can erase all this bullshit on here, if I can get this off of here, it doesn't take very many dinners. See, by 2, 4, about 6 dinners in, he knows that bell, and it's consistent every time I ring that bell. Now, what I usually show in class is this. I could have a smarter dog that just 2 dinners in, he went. That's the measure of smartness. Or a real stupid dog, it'd take him 25 dinners before he finally figured out, oh yeah, that bell means something. Now, what do you figure is going to happen if I start ringing the bell but never bring the meat? I unpair the two. That's extinction. He'll come out into the backyard the first few times because he goes, hey, where's my dinner? And then eventually it's like, you can't trick me. I unpaired him. So here's extinction. I divorced him, and I had this on here, I didn't know. And here's acquisition. I married the two. And so as I marry the two, there's this, reliable learning curve, but I can also make learning go away. It's not that he's not hadn't learned anything, but now he just learns that the bell doesn't mean anything anymore. I hope that these two concepts, acquisition and extinction, were clear to you. Okay, up until now, I've been talking about this one, first order conditioning. There's a bell and a meat. You get one clue that leads up to the good or the bad thing. Okay, now that's not very realistic. Really, in life, there's multiple clues, a pattern of clues that leads up to the thing that you're anticipating. And if you even think about Pavlov, there was the footsteps down the hall, maybe the turning of the door handle, the crinkling of the bag. I don't know how y'all's animals are, but they react to these patterns of clues. When I talked about leaving the house at the first. Okay, so here he is, Rowdy, my pride and joy, and he loves these things. I'm going to argue their things, and I'm going to argue their UCSs because he doesn't have to learn about those things. Now, I call these things cookies. I could have called them anything, but watch.
Rowdy, cookie? Cookie?
So you can see how much he likes that word cookie. But that's not the thing he's going to eat. It's just one of the clues in the chain of clues that leads up to him getting this cookie. The next to last clue is not the word cookie, it's where I keep him. I click, it makes a clicking noise, and anytime he hears that clicking noise, he knows I'm going to say the word cookie, and then he's going to get his cookie. I know I got a little draw happy there, but does that make sense? And really, okay, word cookie, clicking noise, there's a way I walk when I'm fixing to go into the kitchen, I guess, that he knows I'm going to the kitchen right here. It means I'm going to click the thing maybe, which means I'm going to like say the word cookie, which becomes annoying because he thinks he's going to get a cookie. Y'all's animals have to work like this. Okay, my second animal, he's long gone, but I love him so much, Jeremy. I named him after Pearl Jam. Jeremy spoke in class today, but Jeremy hated the vet. Now, I'm going to argue the vet's a thing. And I'm going to argue the thing he really hates is getting that shot in the ass. That's the real UCS. Because the vet is just something that's guilty by association. Orange juice and the shot is the real vodka, the thing that's going to make him hurt or sick, right? Okay, so this is why I love using the vodka example. Now let me get off of that piece. To get him to the vet, I've got to put him in a car. Now, cats and cars are a little bit different than dogs and cars. For dogs, that might be a good thing. For cats, it's like, we're going to the bad man. So I'm going to argue the car is also a CS. It's like the vet's a CS, but so is the car, because the car goes to the vet, and the vet's going to do the bad thing, which is the UCS. Now, to get a cat into a car is different. You can't just throw him into the car like you throw the dog. Usually you have to put him in a carrier. It's like, this goes to the car, and the car goes to the bad man, and the bad man's going to hurt me. So he sees that pattern. Anytime he sees this, he knows he's going to the car to the bad man. So he's very smart about this pattern, and so he'll hide anytime he sees it. And so I'd put it in the other room, but I think I have this sound on here. He could hear that zipping. So that zipper noise goes with this bag, goes to the car. Are y'all with me? Finally, I put it into the garage. It's like, I'm a human being. I know about this stuff. I'm going to beat the cat. You know what I mean? It's like a video game. But anyway, I put it in the garage. I open it all up. I walk back in the house, try to chill out for a few minutes, and then I walk over to Jeremy. It's like, hey, what's up, Jeremy? And he hauls ass because apparently, I guess, I was acting phony, which means I was going to get the thing out, put him in the car, and take him to the bad man that was going to give him the shot. I hope those two examples made sense. This is a story about Clever Hans, and Clever Hans is not this guy, it's the horse. Okay, and so supposedly this horse can do mathematics back in the 1800s. So people would come from miles around, and there would be this little piece of wood. They're not showing it, but they would have a piece of wood on the ground, and he would come over here and he would stomp his foot on the piece of wood for the answer. Like if you did 15 plus 3, it'd stomp his foot on there 18 times, and people go, oh my God, this horse can do mathematics. And it's like, scientists were, come on, this is not scientific. Horses cannot. have the cognitive ability to do mathematics, especially like some of the problems he has over here with fractions and stuff. Okay, and so this is what they found. When they investigated, every time he got a problem right, he got a sugar cube. Okay, so that's the treat. I'm going to argue you don't have to take horses at a sugar cube class, but I just got, raised around horses. And so, they almost bite your hand off if you hold a piece of sugar out there. Okay, so UCS. It's a thing, right? So that's the reward. Now, what leads up to the reward? It's the pattern of clues. That's what the scientists started to investigate. Because I can't do this as good as I can in class, but as he got near, let's say it's 5 times 2, it's 10. Hopefully I did that right. And so as he got to 7, 8, 9, this guy right here would get really excited and start to kind of do this, like just this preemptive reach into his pocket, like, oh, he's going to get it right. And the horse starts to read that behavior, and the closer he gets to, like, that little tell, almost like in poker, the horse goes, okay, stop stomping. So the horse is clever. I'm going to start stomping on this piece of wood until Dum Dum over here acts like he's going to reach into his pocket, and then I'm going to stop stomping. So he is picking up on clues, and he is clever, but he's not doing mathematics. Okay. Thing I wanted to talk about is discrimination and generalization. It'd be great to go off on this right here, and I do talk about it in my social psychology class because I grew up in a town where there's a train track, and on this side you're white, and on this side you're black. You know what I mean? And so I grew up in a part of the country where you treat people differently based on the color of their skin. Now, we see discrimination as a bad thing, and it usually is, but if you don't discriminate between how you treat a cougar and how you treat a bunny rabbit, then I'm going to call you stupid. So sometimes you have to discriminate to save yourself. Generalization, the second term, means I treat everything the same. Now, that's good for people. We should generalize, but it's bad when it comes to things as far as clues. Let's say I train an animal that every time I flash this green light, he's going to get fed. So I pair these two things over and over and over. And what happens? This is the UCS and this becomes a CS. I hope you already know this by now. I wish we were in class, I would quiz you. What do you think is going to happen? Instead of this light, tomorrow morning I shine this light. It's not quite green, it's teal. But maybe the animal will generalize and go, oh, close enough, it's going to be the predictor of my dinner. It could discriminate and say, no, not close enough. And the further away I make the clue from the original, now it might say, oh, that doesn't look like my light at all. That's not my dinner light. And so I can make the original clue really, or the next clue really close to the original clue, and you might generalize. But the more I make the two clues different, the more discriminatory you will become. Now, hopefully that didn't seem confusing. If it, another example, let's say I have a dinner bell, and it sounds like that, and it has this frequency right here. Any bell that I ring right around about the same tinginess or frequency, the dog's going to react to. It's like, oh, close enough. That's generalization up in here. But if I get real different, then the dog might say, no, that doesn't sound like my dinner bell. That's the clock down the hallway. And so it's not going to run down the hall. I hope that makes sense on how animals will discriminate when they're really different, but if they're pretty close or pretty similar right here, they won't. Okay, this story has to do with generalization. It's about little Albert. He was a baby in the 1920s. This isn't really his picture, but I just try to reenact it. And they would bring a rat in. And when they would bring a rat around this baby, Watson and Rayner, it was neutral. The baby was like, okay, it's kind of like orange juice. It's neutral at that point. It's a thing, right? A thing. But what they would do is something kind of mean. After the first few times the rat came in, every time he would come in, they would sneak behind his head and bang these cymbals real loud. And they would do that over and over and over. And so eventually he would get scared and start screaming and crying. And then so now anytime they just bring the rat in by himself, he's freaked the hell out by this rat. This rat has become a bad CS. Why is it a CS? He learned that it was bad. The UCS, he didn't have to learn to startle to a loud noise. If I bring a foghorn right behind your ear and I blow it and you jump, you didn't have to learn to do that. It's a protective, mechanism. Now, this is the bad news. As little not only was he afraid of rats, he was afraid of anything that was white and fuzzy, and this is why it relates to generalization, because anything white and fuzzy is bad. He overgeneralized to where everything white and fuzzy would be the predictor of something bad was fixing to happen. Now you can see how effed up that experiment is. Okay, now we've given little Albert ratophobia. How would we cure him? Well, one thing I could do is to sit him in the room and just stop banging those damn cymbals. If I stop banging these damn cymbals, it's kind of like ringing the bell and don't bring the meat anymore. It loses its meaning. That's extinction. And we'll talk about this later when we talk about therapy and how to get rid of phobias. The second way is counter conditioning, but if I run a counterplay, it's reverse. So I call this one reverse conditioning, means learning. So every time I bring the rat in, instead of banging the cymbals, I'm going to switch it for an ice cream cone. Now he's going to love that rat. Now the rat's still a CS, but now I've learned that he's good. He's not bad. Okay. Now one of the things I usually class is this fucked up movie and book. If you don't like things that are twisted, I don't even like it that much, and I like sick stuff. But in this movie slash book, Alex likes to hurt people. He likes to get real fucked up on drugs and go out and beat the shit out of people and rape and like steal and do all this fucked up shit. Okay, and so they want to cure him. The government gets a hold of him, how we're going to cure him, and this is what they do. They sit Alex in a chair and they strap him into this chair and hold his eyeballs open, and they make him watch these videos all day long of violence. I think it's also pornography, but this is what he likes. But they switch the UCS. What he usually takes is the drugs he likes, but now they feed him full of a nauseant. So they make him watch what he likes, and they put this thing over here, if I got my pen working right, that's going to make him sick. Over and over and over, they pair these two things. And so now, when they take this thing away, the idea is they take away the vodka, he's going to throw up to orange juice. I hope I just made sense there. They also played Beethoven in the movie while they were doing it, and so anytime you heard Beethoven, he would kind of gag. And so it's the same idea as I'm throwing up to orange juice or the thing I like. Because see, this thing I like, CS, violence. I have learned to like violence. Now I learn not to like it. Okay, enough about that effed up. Okay, I also talk about addiction at the very last of this. Why? Because it has a lot to do with classical conditioning. Drugs cause you pleasure. They just do. Otherwise, people wouldn't do them. Why do you think 60,000 people a year die of OxyContin? I mean, come on. You don't have to learn to get pleasure from drugs. They give you pleasure. Okay, but usually you take drugs in a certain context. We talk about this when we talk about optical illusions, a certain surrounding. So the surrounding almost becomes a CS, like a trigger. It almost begins to get you high. Kind of like, the rat begins to get little Albert scared of the symbols coming. It's this anticipatory thing, or it's almost like seeing the orange juice and you're gagging. It's like, yeah, but there's no vodka in it, and you're already having this response. And so these contexts will start to trigger you. And so if you want to get clean, you have to get rid of the context or the orange juice, not just the vodka, because this context will start to get you triggered, and then you'll go back and get high. I just know it because I've been around it way too many times. So this is the last story I usually tell, and then this will be the last of this lecture. If you want to change yourself, you have to change your environment. Yes, you have to change the vodka, maybe, but I use this example of crabs. I stole this from recovery. Now, if I go out and catch a crab, just one, and I put him in a bucket, I'm going to have to put a lid up here on the top of the bucket or he'll get away. He'll climb right out of there. But if I catch multiple crabs on this day, I don't have to put a lid on the top of the bucket. Why? Because when they each try to climb out, the other ones are trying to climb out and they all pull each other back down into the bucket like a vortex. They just stay in here. Hopefully my drawing makes sense right there. But if I were to take that crab and I could put him into a different bucket of crabs, these crabs are sober crabs over here. For instance, let's say maybe these are the drunk crabs. That every time I want to go out and get drunk, that these crabs pull me back in and keep me from fucking my life up. That's my church family or whatever family you keep. It's like I do want to go fuck my life up a lot, but if I hang out with all these other people that want to fuck up their life, we'll keep her. But if I hang out with people that love me, then they'll not let me fuck my life up. It's not their responsibility, but it's the people that I hang around with. And so when it really comes down to it, am I going to hang out with victims or victors? Because victors, it's not that they don't struggle, but they keep each other back in check, and victims also keep each other in their victimology. This is what Carolyn Mace calls wound mates. People that are wounded just want to sit around with other wounded people and talk about their wounds, and I don't want to be in this bucket anymore. I want to be in the bucket right over here. Okay, I'll see y'all next time. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. Bye.